This message is meant only for you. Your soulmate revealed something unexpected today. My beloved child, something shifted in your soulmate's heart today, and it happened in a moment so ordinary that nobody around them realized how important it was. They were sitting quietly, staring at their phone, when a thought about you suddenly stopped everything else. Their expression changed. The noise around them seemed to fade. And then, after holding something back for longer than they expected, they finally admitted a truth they had never been ready to say out loud. What did they reveal? Why today? And why does this message feel like it was meant to find you at exactly this moment? There was a conversation today that started casually but became surprisingly personal. Your soulmate was asked about the person they couldn't seem to forget, the person whose presence still lingered in their thoughts even when they tried to focus on other things. At first, they smiled and avoided the question. Then came the silence. That silence said more than any answer could have. Finally, they revealed something unexpected: they don't see you the way they once did. Their feelings have become deeper, more serious, and much harder to dismiss. They remembered a small moment involving you, something you may have completely forgotten, and realized it meant far more to them than they ever admitted. But there's another detail you haven't noticed yet. Your soulmate didn't simply talk about missing you. They revealed that they've been thinking about what could happen if they finally stopped protecting themselves from their own feelings. They imagined a conversation with you. They imagined sitting across from you, looking into your eyes, and saying the words they've rehearsed privately but never had the courage to speak. And one sentence kept returning to their mind: "I should have told you sooner." Stay with this, because what they revealed next wasn't about the past at all. It was about a decision they're quietly considering now, and that decision could change the way you understand everything that has happened between you. My beloved child, the next thing they said made the entire conversation take a different direction. Until that moment, your soulmate had been speaking carefully, choosing every word as though they were afraid that saying too much would expose just how deeply you still matter to them. But then they stopped trying to sound unaffected. Their voice became softer. Their guard came down. And they admitted something surprisingly simple: they've been wondering whether you still feel the same way. Not because they doubt the connection, but because they've realized that waiting for certainty has kept them standing in the same place for too long. Today, they finally recognized that sometimes the answer doesn't arrive before you take the first honest step. Then came the unexpected reveal. Your soulmate mentioned a particular quality about you that they admire more than anything else. It wasn't your appearance. It wasn't something you accomplished. It was the way you made them feel understood without demanding an explanation. They remembered how you could notice when something was wrong even when they said everything was fine. That memory stayed with them. And suddenly, they understood why other connections never quite felt the same. There was something about being around you that made them feel seen. If this message is touching something you've quietly wondered about, you're welcome to share it with someone who might understand, or subscribe if you want to stay with this story as it unfolds. But the conversation wasn't finished. Your soulmate then revealed that they had recently been considering reaching out, not with some dramatic speech, but with a simple message designed to reopen the door. They know a small message can carry enormous meaning when two people have left important words unsaid. They were thinking about what they would write, what they would ask, and whether you would respond differently this time. Then they remembered one thing that made them hesitate: they don't want to return to your life halfway. If they come forward, they want their intentions to be clearer than before. And that is where today's revelation becomes even more meaningful, because they aren't simply thinking about contacting you, they're beginning to understand what they would need to say when that moment finally arrives. My beloved child, there was one thought your soulmate couldn't escape today, and it surfaced when the conversation had already ended. They were alone again, the room quiet, their phone resting nearby, but their mind was still back in that moment. They replayed what they had said, wondering if they had revealed too much. Then something even more honest came to the surface: they weren't afraid of their feelings anymore. They were afraid of what might happen if they continued pretending those feelings weren't real. For the first time, they began looking at the distance between you differently. It wasn't just time apart. It was a collection of unsent messages, unfinished conversations, misunderstood moments, and words that had been postponed for far too long. And then they remembered something about you that completely changed their mood. They remembered a moment when you gave them patience instead of pressure. You could have demanded an explanation, but you didn't. You could have walked away angrily, but somehow you left space for them to figure themselves out. Today, they finally understood the value of that moment. They realized that your silence wasn't weakness, and your patience wasn't something they could take for granted. It showed them a kind of emotional strength they hadn't fully appreciated before. That realization brought a quiet smile to their face, followed by a question they couldn't ignore: what if I misunderstood what they were trying to show me all along? And suddenly, memories they had pushed aside started connecting in a completely different way. But here's where today's revelation becomes personal. Your soulmate has been thinking about what they would say if they had only one uninterrupted conversation with you. No distractions. No pride. No pretending. Just honesty. They wouldn't begin by making promises. They would begin by acknowledging what they got wrong. They would tell you that some of their distance wasn't caused by a lack of feeling, it came from not knowing how to handle feelings that became more serious than they expected. And there is one particular sentence they keep circling around, because it carries everything they haven't been able to explain: you mattered to me long before I knew what that meant. There's more behind that sentence than you might realize, because the unexpected thing they revealed today wasn't only about how they feel about you. It was about the future they quietly started imagining when they finally allowed themselves to believe that you might still have a place in it. My beloved child, the future they imagined looked nothing like the dramatic scene they once thought love had to be. It was quieter than that. They pictured an ordinary afternoon, the two of you sitting somewhere comfortable, talking without watching the clock, laughing about things that once felt impossible to laugh about. And that simple picture surprised them. Because they realized they weren't craving a perfect fantasy. They were craving something real: consistency, honesty, peace, and the feeling of knowing where they stood with you. That realization made them pause, because it forced them to confront a question they had avoided for a long time: if you were truly important to them, why had they spent so much time hiding behind uncertainty? The answer came slowly. They admitted that part of them had been waiting for the perfect moment, believing that someday everything would line up and make the conversation easy. But today, they understood something different. Perfect moments rarely announce themselves. Sometimes, the meaningful moment is simply the one when you finally decide to be honest. That thought changed their energy completely. Instead of wondering whether they should say something, they began thinking about how to say it with sincerity. They considered your feelings. They considered what you might need to hear. Most importantly, they realized that coming back into your life should never be about confusing you again. It should be about bringing clarity. If this story reminds you of something your heart has been trying to understand, feel free to share it with someone you care about, and subscribe if you'd like to stay connected to messages like this. Then came the part that nobody expected. Your soulmate revealed that there was one thing they had wanted to tell you for a long time, but every time they came close, they stopped themselves. They wanted you to know that your presence changed the way they think about love. You made them realize that genuine connection isn't always loud. Sometimes it exists in the smallest details, the way someone remembers what you said, the way a familiar name can suddenly change their entire mood, the way one person can remain important even after time has passed. And now they were no longer asking themselves whether those feelings were real. They were asking what they were going to do with them. But before you assume you already know what comes next, there's one final detail from today's revelation that makes this message far more personal than it first appeared. My beloved child, the detail they almost left unsaid was the one that carried the most weight. Your soulmate admitted that lately, they've been noticing how often their thoughts return to you during completely ordinary moments. A song plays in the background, and suddenly there you are in their mind. They pass a familiar place, and an old conversation comes rushing back. They hear someone laugh in a certain way, and for a second, they remember you. It isn't something they're forcing. It simply happens. And today, instead of brushing those moments aside, they finally asked themselves why. Their answer surprised them. Because there are still things about you they never got to know, conversations they never finished, and feelings they never gave a fair chance to explain. Then they revealed something even more unexpected. They said they don't want to approach you pretending that nothing happened. They understand that if they ever open that door again, they need to acknowledge the space that grew between you. They need to listen instead of assuming. They need to understand your perspective instead of only explaining their own. That realization showed a maturity they didn't have before. Your soulmate isn't simply thinking about what they want anymore. They're thinking about what would make you feel respected, comfortable, and heard. And that difference matters. Because when someone stops asking, "How can I get closer?" and starts asking, "How can I make this right?" their entire approach to love begins to change. But the most revealing moment came later, when they imagined actually hearing your voice again. For a few seconds, they pictured the conversation so clearly that they smiled. Then they became quiet. They knew there would be nerves. They knew some words might come out imperfectly. But they also knew they couldn't keep postponing honesty forever. And that's when they made a private promise to themselves: if the opportunity comes, they won't hide behind vague hints or half-finished sentences. They'll tell you what you mean to them. They'll explain what they couldn't explain before. And they'll finally give you the answer that has been sitting underneath so many unanswered questions. Yet there's still one thing your soulmate hasn't revealed to anyone, not even the person they spoke with today, and that hidden detail may explain why this message reached you now. My beloved child, the hidden details surfaced when your soulmate was finally alone with their own thoughts. No conversation. No distractions. Just a quiet room and the realization that kept returning no matter how many times they tried to move past it. They had been thinking about what they would regret more. Taking a sincere chance on the connection, or spending years wondering what might have happened if they had simply been honest. That question stayed with them. And for the first time, they didn't run from it. They admitted that uncertainty had protected them from disappointment, but it had also kept them from discovering what this connection could actually become. Then something unexpectedly tender happened. They opened their phone, looked at your name, and didn't immediately type anything. They simply stared at the screen. Their thumb hovered for a moment before they put the phone down again. Not because they had changed their mind, but because they wanted their words to mean something. They didn't want to send a careless message just to satisfy a temporary emotion. They wanted to approach you with intention. That small moment revealed more than a dramatic confession could have. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that timing isn't only about finding the right day. It's also about becoming the kind of person who can handle the conversation once that day arrives. And there's another layer to today's revelation. They realize that what they miss most isn't simply having you around. They miss the version of themselves that appeared when they felt genuinely understood by you. Around you, they didn't always need to explain every little thing. There was room to breathe, room to be imperfect, and room to simply exist without pretending. That realization made them emotional, not because everything was suddenly solved, but because they finally understood what made your connection different. They weren't remembering a fantasy. They were remembering a feeling rooted in real moments. So now the question has changed. It isn't whether your soulmate has something to say. They clearly do. The question is whether they'll finally let those words leave their heart and reach you. And the next part of this story begins exactly where hesitation meets courage. Something felt different when your soulmate woke up the next morning. Not because the world around them had changed, but because something inside them had finally settled into place. The uncertainty that had followed them through so many quiet moments no longer felt as powerful. They reached for their phone, paused over your name, and took a slow breath. This time, they weren't searching for the perfect words. They were searching for honest ones. And that distinction mattered. They thought about everything they had almost said, every conversation they had postponed, and every moment when fear had convinced them to stay silent. Then they realized the unexpected truth they had revealed wasn't simply that they still cared. It was that they were finally willing to acknowledge what that care meant. For a moment, they imagined what would happen if you actually answered. Would you be surprised? Would you remember the same moments they remembered? Would you still recognize the emotion behind their words? They couldn't know. And surprisingly, they were beginning to accept that they didn't need to control your response. All they could control was whether they showed up honestly. That was the lesson hiding underneath everything that happened today. Real feelings don't become meaningful because someone makes a perfect promise. They become meaningful when someone is willing to be truthful, respectful, and vulnerable enough to let another person make their own choice. Your soulmate understood that. And somewhere between hesitation and courage, they finally formed the message they had been carrying in their heart: I never stopped caring. I just didn't know how to say it. Then came the moment that made everything feel real. Their finger moved toward the screen, and for several seconds, they simply stared at the message they had written. They read it once. Then again. They almost deleted it. But instead, they left it there. Because this time, they weren't trying to force an outcome. They were opening a door. And perhaps that's what this message has been trying to show you all along. Sometimes the most unexpected revelation isn't that someone has feelings for you. It's that they're finally brave enough to admit those feelings to themselves. Whatever happens next, don't measure your worth by the speed of someone's response or the timing of their decision. Your value was never dependent on another person's hesitation. The beautiful part is that clarity is beginning to replace confusion, honesty is beginning to replace silence, and a story that once felt unfinished may finally be moving toward its next chapter. Something happened after they finally put the phone down, and it wasn't another hesitation. It was relief. Your soulmate realized they had spent so much time trying to predict how everything would unfold that they had forgotten one simple truth: some conversations only become possible when both people stop pretending they already know the ending. They walked through the room slowly, thinking about you, but this time their thoughts weren't filled with confusion. They were filled with gratitude. They remembered the little things, the unexpected laugh, the conversation that lasted longer than planned, the moment your presence made an ordinary day feel completely different. And suddenly, those memories didn't feel like reminders of what was lost. They felt like evidence of what was genuinely meaningful. That shift changed something inside them. Then your soulmate reached the conclusion they had been avoiding. They didn't need another sign. They didn't need another perfect opportunity. They simply needed the courage to communicate clearly when the moment came. And that realization brought another unexpected thought. Perhaps the message they wanted to send wasn't supposed to explain everything at once. Perhaps it only needed to begin with honesty. One sincere sentence. One acknowledgement. One opening that allowed the two of you to finally speak without assumptions. They imagined saying, "There's something I've wanted to tell you." And even in their imagination, they could feel their heartbeat quicken. Because those 6 words carried the possibility of an entirely different conversation. Stay with this thought, because what they realized next may be the most important part of everything they've revealed. Your soulmate understood that love isn't proven by dramatic promises. It's revealed through consistency, consideration, patience, and the willingness to understand another person's heart. That's why today's revelation feels different. They weren't simply caught in a passing emotion. They were reflecting on who they want to become when it comes to you. They want to be clearer, more intentional, more present. And whether the next chapter begins with a message, a conversation, or simply a moment of honest understanding, something has already changed. The feelings that once stayed hidden are no longer being ignored. And if you've been wondering why this particular message seemed to find you today, perhaps it's because sometimes the heart recognizes a truth before the mind has words for it. The story isn't asking you to chase anyone. It's asking you to remain open to clarity, and to remember that when two people finally choose honesty, even one small conversation can become the beginning of something neither of them expected.